A black man? In first class? What's next? The pilot's a janitor?
Blake Bennett said nothing.
Oh, so you don't talk either? Just sit there eating up a seat that someone who actually earned it could be using.
Karen Whitmore ripped his boarding pass in half and threw it at his chest.
Go back of the plane! You know the drill. Your grandparents sure did.
Every head in business class turned. Nobody said a word. Blake picked the pieces off his lap, set them on the armrest, looked her dead in the eye.
I'm not moving.
3 words. That's all it took. She slapped him so hard her palm print stayed on his cheek for the next hour. Mid-flight, full cabin, 46 witnesses. Blake didn't touch his face. He reached for his phone. 1 call, 11 seconds.
Victor.
That 11-second call would cost Orion Atlantic $40 million before the sun came up. The cabin stayed frozen for 6 full seconds after the slap. The sound still hung in the recycled air, like something that had broken and couldn't be put back together. Karen Whitmore stood over Blake Bennett, breathing hard, her right palm still tingling. She expected him to yell, to stand up, to give her a reason to call the air marshal. That was how this was supposed to work. She pushes, he reacts, and suddenly he's the problem. But Blake didn't react. He sat in seat 3A with his hands folded in his lap, the left side of his face already turning a dull red, and looked at her the way you look at weather, something unpleasant, something that would pass. That calm, that unbothered, immovable calm, made Karen's blood hotter than the slap itself.
You think sitting there like a statue is going to help you?
She pointed toward the back curtain. I told you, economy, that way. Or I call the captain and have you removed in handcuffs when we land. Blake's voice was low and even. Call whoever you need to call. Gerald Thorne, the white businessman in 3B, had watched the whole exchange over the top of his phone. He had boarded 6 minutes earlier. Karen had greeted him with champagne and his last name. She had not asked for his boarding pass. Hey! Gerald's voice cut through the cabin. What the hell was that? Karen turned. Her customer service mask flickered back on for half a second. Old habit, white passenger, different protocol. Sir, this is a crew matter. Please stay seated.
A crew matter? You just assaulted a passenger.
He was being aggressive. Gerald stared at her. He hasn't moved. He hasn't raised his voice. He literally just sat there. Karen's jaw tightened. Sir, I need you to stay out of this, or I'll report you for interfering with cabin crew. Gerald shook his head but sat back. The threat worked. Federal offense, interfering with flight crew. Everyone knew the rule. Karen had weaponized it 100 times before. Say the magic words, and passengers fold like napkins. But something else was happening in the cabin. Something Karen didn't see. Row 5. Window seat. Denise Carter, a black woman, 31, content creator with 200,000 followers, had her phone propped against the seat pocket in front of her. The camera was pointed directly at Karen. The red dot had been blinking since Karen first raised her voice. Denise had started recording the moment she heard, "First class has standards." By now, the Instagram Live had 400 viewers. The number was climbing. In the galley, Allison Reed stood with her back against the drink cart, hands shaking. She had seen the slap. She had heard everything. 3 years on the job, and she had watched Karen bully passengers before, always the same ones, always the ones Karen decided didn't fit. Allison had never said anything. She told herself it wasn't that bad, that Karen was just strict, that it wasn't her place. But a slap across the face at 37,000 feet wasn't strict. It was assault. Allison picked up the intercom handset, hesitated, then put it down. She didn't call the captain. Not yet. She told herself she would. Soon. Back in business class, Karen made her next move. She grabbed a printed passenger manifest from the galley counter and walked back to Blake's seat. Final chance. I'm marking you as a security threat and having you escorted off this aircraft when we land. She clicked her pen. Name? Blake looked at the manifest. Then at Karen, "You already have my name. You checked my boarding pass. Twice. I'm asking you again." Blake Bennett. Karen wrote it down. She didn't recognize it. Why would she? She didn't read shareholder filings. She didn't follow logistics trade journals. She didn't know that the man she had just slapped, humiliated, and threatened to arrest was sitting on 18% of Orion Atlantic's stock, and that his company handled 60% of every piece of cargo this airline moved across the country. She clicked the pen shut and walked away. Blake pulled out his phone, opened his contacts, found a name. Victor Caldwell, Horizon Global, General Counsel. He typed one text. "Need the board on a call tonight, all of them, non-negotiable." He hit send, set the phone face down on the armrest, and closed his eyes. Blake Bennett grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago, in a building where the elevator hadn't worked since before he was born. 4 floors up, no air conditioning, walls thin enough to hear every argument, every prayer, every late-night sob his mother tried to muffle with a pillow. His mother, Lorraine Bennett, was a black woman who worked 3 jobs and never once called in sick. She cleaned office buildings from 6 to noon, ran a register at a grocery store from 1 to 6, and did alterations for a dry cleaner on weekends. Her hands were always moving, always cracked at the knuckles. She smelled like bleach and fabric softener and exhaustion. Blake's father, Thomas, drove a delivery truck for a paper company. He died when Blake was 9. Heart attack behind the wheel on I-94, halfway through his second shift of the day. The truck drifted into a guardrail. The company sent flowers and a $300 check. Lorraine never cashed it. She said it felt like a receipt for her husband's life, and the price was an insult. After that, Blake became the man of the house. He was 9 years old and already carrying grocery bags up 4 flights of stairs because his mother's knees were giving out. He learned to fix things: the leaking sink, the radiator that clanked all winter, the front door lock that needed a specific jiggle to catch. He learned that broken things didn't fix themselves, and that nobody was coming to fix them for you. School was a different kind of survival. Blake was the quiet kid who sat in the front row and never raised his hand, but aced every test. Teachers liked his grades. They did not fight for him. When a guidance counselor told him community college was more realistic for someone in his situation, Blake didn't argue. He just applied to Northwestern anyway. Full scholarship. Applied mathematics. He graduated in 3 years. Not because he was in a rush, because he couldn't afford a 4th year of textbooks. His first job out of college was loading freight trucks at a distribution center on the west side of Chicago. 16-hour shifts, minimum wage plus overtime. His co-workers were almost all Black and Latino men who had been doing the same job for 20 years with no promotion in sight. The supervisors, almost all white, called them by last names only and never learned the first ones. Blake lasted 14 months. Not because he quit, because he saw something the supervisors didn't. The routing was broken. Trucks were running half empty on return trips. Fuel costs were double what they should have been. He wrote a 20-page report on his kitchen table, printed it at the public library, and handed it to the regional manager. The manager read it, implemented every recommendation, saved the company $800,000 in the first quarter. Blake got a 50-cent raise. That was the day he decided he would never build someone else's empire again. He started Horizon Global Holdings with 1 truck, a used freightliner he bought for $11,000 with money he had saved over 3 years. He drove it himself. Chicago to Indianapolis, Indianapolis to Louisville, Louisville back to Chicago. He slept in the cab. He ate gas station sandwiches. He did his own books on a laptop balanced on the passenger seat. Within 2 years, he had 4 trucks. Within 5, he had 40. Within 10, Horizon Global was a mid-size logistics company pulling $90 million in annual revenue. Within 20, it was a $2.3 billion empire with 12,000 employees, contracts with 3 major airlines, and a fleet of 800 vehicles operating across 31 states. Blake sat on 2 Fortune 500 boards. He had turned down a cabinet appointment the previous spring, not because he didn't care about public service, but because he didn't trust politics to let him actually serve. He donated quietly, scholarships for first-generation college students, legal aid for black business owners, a community center on the south side 3 blocks from the apartment where he grew up. He never moved to Greenwich or the Hamptons. He kept a house in Hyde Park, drove a 6-year-old Lincoln, and wore the same rotation of polos and khakis he had worn for a decade. His sneakers were old because he liked them broken in. His watch was absent because he checked the time on his phone like everyone else. People who knew Blake, truly knew him, understood that the simplicity wasn't an act, it was a principle. Lorraine Bennett had taught her son that the loudest people in the room were usually the emptiest. Blake believed it. He lived it. And he had never once, not in boardrooms, not in restaurants where maitre d's seated him by the kitchen, not in country clubs where members asked if he was the valet, used his wealth as a weapon. He saved that for people who left him no choice. Right now, at 37,000 feet, with a handprint still fading on his cheek and a torn boarding pass on his armrest, Blake Bennett was running out of choices. And Orion Atlantic Airlines was running out of time. Denise Carter's phone had been recording for 11 minutes. The Instagram live viewer count had just crossed 12,000. The comments were moving too fast to read, but the ones that stuck were all saying the same thing. Who is this woman? What airline is this? Someone find her name. Denise kept the camera steady. She had started filming on instinct, the moment Karen Whitmore's voice had cut through the cabin with, "First class has standards." Something in Denise's chest had tightened. She recognized that tone. Every black person in America recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone who had decided you didn't belong before you even opened your mouth. Now, 11 minutes later, the video had captured everything. The double boarding pass check. The champagne served to every white passenger while Blake got nothing. The demand to move to economy. The torn boarding pass. And the slap. The open palm, full-force slap that had echoed through business class like a crack in the fuselage. Denise's hands weren't shaking anymore. They had been at first. Now they were steady. She understood what she was holding. Evidence. In the front galley, Karen Whitmore was pouring herself a cup of water. Her hands were shaking, but not from guilt, from adrenaline. She felt justified. The man had refused a direct order from a senior flight attendant. He had been disruptive. He had provoked her. That was what she would write in the incident report. That was what she would tell the captain. That was what she believed. She took a sip and smoothed her uniform. Then she walked back into the cabin. Blake was still in 3A, still seated, still quiet. The red mark on his cheek had deepened to a bruise. Karen stopped in the aisle. "You're still here?" "I am. I've already written you up. When we land, security will be waiting. You're going to wish you'd just moved when I told you to." Blake looked at her, not with anger, not with contempt, with something worse. Clarity. The look of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for the other side to finish talking. "Are you done?" he said. Karen's lip curled. "You think you're smart? You think sitting there with that look on your face makes you better than me? You're nothing. You walked onto this plane with nothing, and you'll walk off with nothing. That's how it always works for people like you." The woman in seat 2A, white, mid-50s, pearl earrings, looked away. The man in 4C pulled his blanket up to his chin. A teenager in row 6 put in her earphones and closed her eyes. The cabin was doing what cabins do. What crowds do. What people have always done when someone else is being destroyed in public. They looked away. They made themselves small. They decided it wasn't their problem. Gerald Thorne didn't look away. He had his phone in his hand now. Not recording, he was texting his wife. 3 words. "This is wrong." And then there was Allison Reed. Allison stood at the edge of the galley curtain, watching Karen unload on a man who hadn't raised his voice once. 3 years she had worked under Karen. 3 years of watching Karen pat down the bags of black passengers for security. 3 years of watching Karen seat brown families in the back, even when front rows were empty.
3 years of Karen saying things like, "They always try to upgrade," and "You have to watch the ones who don't look right."
3 years of Allison telling herself it wasn't that bad, that Karen was just old school, that saying something would cost her the job she needed to pay off her student loans. But right now, watching a bruise form on a man's face because he wouldn't give up a seat he paid for, Allison felt the cost of her silence for the first time. It sat in her stomach like a stone she had been swallowing for years. She still didn't say anything, but something had shifted, something that couldn't shift back. Back in the cabin, Karen delivered her final shot. She leaned down until her face was level with Blake's. "You know what I think? I think you saved up for months just to buy this one ticket so you could pretend to be somebody. That's what your people do. Fake it, flash it, and then go right back to whatever hole you crawled out of." Blake held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he reached into his bag, pulled out a small leather notebook, and wrote something down. The date, the time, her name. He had read it off her badge in the first 30 seconds. The seat number, the exact words she had used. He closed the notebook and slipped it back into his bag. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I needed." Karen blinked. Something in the way he said it, calm, almost grateful, scraped against the back of her brain like a warning she couldn't quite hear. For the first time since she had started this, a whisper of doubt crept in. She shook it off, straightened her uniform, walked back to the galley. On Denise Carter's phone, the viewer count had just hit 43,000. The video was being screen recorded, clipped, and reposted across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook in real time. Hashtags were forming on their own. Hashtag Seat3A, hashtag Orion Atlantic, hashtag Flight Attendant Slap. The plane was still 2 hours from JFK, but on the ground, the story was already running faster than the aircraft, and Karen Whitmore had no idea that her name, her full name, her badge number, her airline, her route, was being typed into search bars by 500,000 people who had already decided she was the villain. She was right about one thing, though. Someone on this plane was pretending to be somebody they weren't. It just wasn't Blake. Captain James Powell, white, 54, 26 years flying commercial, stepped out of the cockpit at 9:47 p.m. because Allison Reed had finally picked up the intercom. Her voice had been barely above a whisper. "Captain, we have a situation in business class. A lead attendant struck a passenger." Powell thought he had misheard. In 26 years, he had dealt with drunk passengers, medical emergencies, bomb threats, and one man who tried to open the cabin door at 40,000 feet. He had never once dealt with a crew member hitting a passenger. He paused at the cockpit door and told his first officer to keep the descent on schedule. Then he straightened his jacket, rolled his shoulders back, and walked through the curtain into business class. He saw it immediately. A black man in 3A with a visible bruise on his left cheek, and Karen Whitmore standing in the aisle with her arms crossed like she was guarding a checkpoint. The cabin was dead silent. Not the peaceful silence of a night flight. The heavy, sick silence of people who had witnessed something ugly and were still deciding what to do about it. "Karen, what happened?" "He refused to comply with the seating reassignment. He became aggressive. I had to restrain the situation." Powell looked at Blake. The man was sitting with his hands in his lap, a laptop bag at his feet, and a torn boarding pass on his armrest. He didn't look aggressive. He looked like a man who had been hit and decided not to hit back. "Sir, are you all right?" Blake nodded once. "I'm fine. I'd like her name and badge number for the record." "You already have it," Karen snapped. "And when we land, you're the one security is going to be talking to, not me." Powell held up a hand. "Karen, galley, now." She opened her mouth, closed it, walked to the galley. The captain followed. Behind the curtain, the conversation was short and sharp. Powell had already seen enough. The bruise, the torn boarding pass, the body language of a man who had been calm through something that would have made most people scream. "Did you hit him?" It was a reaction. He wouldn't. Did you hit him, Karen? Silence. Then, he provoked me. A seated passenger with his hands in his lap provoked you into striking him across the face. Karen's eyes darted. You weren't there. You didn't see the way he looked at me, the defiance, like he had some kind of right to. He has every right. He has a boarding pass for that seat. You checked it yourself. James, you're relieved of cabin duties for the rest of this flight. Sit in the jump seat. Don't speak to any passengers. Don't speak to Blake Bennett. Don't speak to anyone until we land and I file my report. And Karen, this is going to corporate. You need to understand that. Karen's face went white. Not with shame. With the realization that the story she had been telling herself, the one where she was right, where the black man in old sneakers was the problem, where a slap was just restraining the situation, was not going to be the story the captain told. James, you don't understand. He didn't belong. Sit down. She sat. And for the first time in 14 years, Karen Whitmore had nothing to say. In business class, the atmosphere had shifted. The silence that had been passive, the look-away, mind-your-own-business quiet of people who didn't want trouble, had turned into something heavier. Guilt. The passengers could feel the weight of what they had watched and done nothing to stop. The woman in 2A stared at the ceiling. The man in 4C hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. The teenager in row 6 had taken her earphones out and was sitting very still, eyes open, staring at the seat back in front of her. Gerald Thorne leaned over to Blake. I saw everything, from the first boarding pass check to the slap. If you need a witness, Gerald Thorne, Thorne Capital Management. He handed Blake a business card. Blake took it. Thank you. I should have said something sooner, before it got to. He gestured at Blake's cheek. You said something. That counts for more than you think. 2 rows back, Denise Carter ended her Instagram Live. The final viewer count? 67,000. The video had been screen recorded, clipped, and reposted across every major platform before she even hit stop. Twitter, 42,000 retweets. TikTok, 900,000 views and climbing. A news producer at CNN had already sent her a direct message asking for the raw footage. The hashtag #Seat3A was trending nationally. A second hashtag was forming, #Orion Atlantic Racist. In his seat, Blake opened his phone. 3 missed calls from Victor Caldwell, his general counsel. A text. Board call confirmed. Midnight. All 7 members. What's the agenda? Blake typed back, Orion Atlantic, full exit, stock and logistics, both on the table. No half measures. He hit send and looked out the window. Below, the lights of some small Pennsylvania town blinked in the darkness. Thousands of ordinary lives, none of them knowing that a slap on a plane was about to become the most expensive act of racism in American aviation history. The plane began its descent into JFK. Blake put his phone away, straightened his collar, and folded his hands across his lap. He had spent 3 hours being called a thief, a fraud, and an animal. He had been slapped across the face in front of 46 strangers who did nothing. He hadn't raised his voice once. But the quiet was over, and what came next would be loud enough for the whole country to hear. Richard Caldwell, white, 58, CEO of Orion Atlantic Airlines, was asleep in his Greenwich estate when his phone started ringing at 4:51 a.m. He ignored the first call. And the second. By the third, his wife nudged him hard enough to knock him sideways. Richard, your phone. He grabbed it. 14 missed calls. 9 texts. 3 from his head of communications, 2 from the board chair, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize that simply read, You should check Twitter. Richard Caldwell did not use Twitter. He considered social media a waste of time, something for teenagers and people without real jobs. But he opened the app anyway, typed Orion Atlantic into the search bar, and felt his stomach drop through the mattress. The top result was a video, 32 seconds, A white flight attendant slapping a black man across the face in business class. Posted 11 hours ago. 89 million views. 89 million. The comments were a wall of fire. Boycott Orion. Cancel your miles. Name her. Fire her. Sue them. Burn it down. Richard sat up in bed and called his head of PR, Sandra Mitchell. She picked up on the first ring. She had been awake for 3 hours. How bad is it? Category 5, Richard. Every major network is running it. CNN, MSNBC, Fox. And they all have different angles but the same footage. The flight attendant's name is already public. Karen Whitmore. 14 years with us. The hashtag Orion Atlantic racist has been trending for 6 hours. We're getting boycott pledges from 3 sitting senators. What do we know about the passenger? His name is Blake Bennett. Do we know anything about him? Does he have a record, a history of... Richard? Sandra's voice dropped. I need you to listen very carefully. Blake Bennett is the founder and CEO of Horizon Global Holdings. Richard blinked. He knew Horizon Global. Everyone in aviation knew Horizon Global. They were one of the largest logistics companies in North America, 800 vehicles, contracts across the industry, and they were... Sandra, please don't tell me what I think you're about to tell me. Horizon Global handles 60% of our cargo logistics. The contract is worth $120 million a year. And Richard, she paused, Bennett Capital Partners holds 18% of Orion Atlantic stock. Blake Bennett is our single largest individual shareholder. The silence on the line lasted 7 seconds. Richard counted every one. You're telling me, he said slowly, that one of our flight attendants slapped our biggest shareholder across the face? On camera. And 89 million people watched it. That's what I'm telling you. Richard Caldwell stood up, walked to his bathroom, and closed the door. He gripped the edge of the sink and stared at himself in the mirror. He was a man who had navigated fuel crises, union strikes, and a pandemic that nearly bankrupted the airline. He had never once looked in the mirror and seen a man who was about to lose. He saw one now. At 6:15 a.m., Richard called Blake Bennett directly. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered. Blake's executive assistant, Patricia Owens. Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Bennett is aware of your call. He's not available. I need to speak with him. Personally. This is... Mr. Caldwell, I've been instructed to relay the following. Mr. Bennett has directed Horizon Global's legal team to initiate termination of all logistics contracts with Orion Atlantic Airlines, effective in 30 days per the force majeure clause tied to reputational misconduct. Additionally, Bennett Capital Partners will begin divesting its 18% equity stake in Orion Atlantic via open market sale beginning at market open this morning. Richard's knees buckled. He sat down on the edge of the bathtub. He can't. That stock dump alone will... Mr. Bennett's position is that Orion Atlantic's failure to maintain basic standards of human decency toward its passengers constitutes a material breach of the values clause embedded in the investment charter. This is not a negotiation, Mr. Caldwell. This is a notification. The line went dead. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern, the New York Stock Exchange opened. Within the first 45 minutes, Bennett Capital Partners began selling its Orion Atlantic shares in large, systematic blocks. The market saw the volumes spike. Analysts saw the insider movement. Headlines connected the dots in real time. Breaking. Orion Atlantic's largest shareholder dumps entire stake following racist assault on flight. By 11 a.m., Orion Atlantic's stock had dropped 22%. $40 million in market capitalization. Gone. Trading desks across Wall Street were fielding calls from institutional investors asking the same question. If the company's biggest shareholder is running for the exit, why aren't we? By noon, 2 more hedge funds had begun reducing their positions. The bleeding wasn't stopping. It was accelerating. In his office at Horizon Global's Chicago headquarters, Blake Bennett sat at his desk with a cup of black coffee and the morning's Wall Street Journal. The front page carried the story above the fold. His phone had 400 unread messages. CNN, NBC, The Washington Post and 3 civil rights organizations had all requested interviews. He hadn't responded to any of them. Not yet. On his desk sat a small leather notebook, the same one he had pulled out on the plane. He opened it to the page where he had written Karen Whitmore's name, badge number, and the exact words she had used. He read them one more time. Then he closed the notebook and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't need it anymore. The whole world had the receipts now. Karen Whitmore was fired at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 14 hours after the slap. She was not fired gently. There was no private conversation in a back office, no HR representative with a soft voice and a tissue box. Richard Caldwell's legal team drafted the termination letter at 6 a.m. and sent it to Karen's personal email before she had even finished her coffee. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first cited gross misconduct. The second cited violation of Orion Atlantic's passenger safety and anti-discrimination policy. The third informed her that the airline would be cooperating fully with the New York Police Department, which had opened an assault investigation based on the viral video and a formal complaint filed by Blake Bennett's legal counsel at 7:15 a.m. Karen read the email twice. Then she called her union representative. He didn't pick up. She called again. Voicemail. She called a third time, and this time he answered. "I saw the video, Karen." "That video doesn't show the full story. He was..." "Karen, I watched the full 32 minutes of the live stream, the unedited version, the one where you called him a freeloader, ripped his boarding pass, and told him to go back where he belongs. I can't help you. The union can't help you. No one can help you with what's on that tape." She hung up, sat on the edge of her bed in her Queens apartment, still in the uniform she hadn't changed out of, and stared at her phone as the notifications piled up. Her name was everywhere. Every news site, every social media platform. Her high school yearbook photo had been found and reposted with the caption, "This is her. This is the woman who slapped a black billionaire at 37,000 feet." By noon, the NYPD confirmed the assault investigation. Karen's mugshot, taken at the precinct in Jamaica, Queens, where she had turned herself in on advice from a lawyer she found on Google at 10 a.m., was on CNN before the ink on her fingerprints was dry. The charges? Third-degree assault. A misdemeanor, but in the court of public opinion, the sentence had already been handed down. Her neighbors had found out. 2 of them had left notes under her door, not of support, but of disgust. The bodega owner on her block, a Dominican man named Raul, who had sold Karen coffee every morning for 9 years, refused to serve her when she walked in that afternoon. He didn't say a word, just shook his head and pointed at the door. Karen Whitmore was done. Not just at Orion Atlantic. Every airline in the Star Alliance, every carrier in the One World network, every regional operator and charter company in North America had seen the video. Her name had become a verb in aviation HR departments. Don't Karen a passenger. She would never work in the industry again. But Karen's fall was only one piece of the wreckage. At Orion Atlantic headquarters in Fort Worth, Richard Caldwell held a press conference at 2 p.m. Eastern. He stood behind a podium with the company logo, flanked by the head of HR and the chief diversity officer, a position that had been created 6 months earlier and had until today been largely ceremonial. Richard read from a prepared statement. He called the incident abhorrent and unacceptable. He announced Karen's termination. He announced a full review of cabin crew training protocols. He announced a $2 million commitment to diversity and inclusion initiatives. The press conference lasted 11 minutes. The first question from a reporter ended it. "Mr. Caldwell, were you aware that the passenger your flight attendant assaulted is Blake Bennett, the CEO of Horizon Global, your airline's largest cargo partner, and your single largest individual shareholder?" Richard blinked. The camera flashes popped like small detonations. The identity of the passenger was not immediately. "So you didn't know? You put out a generic apology without knowing who you were apologizing to. Is that correct?" Richard's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. His PR director stepped to the mic and said, "We'll take no further questions at this time." The clip of Richard Caldwell, mouth open, eyes blank, drowning behind his own logo, went viral within the hour. It became a meme. It became a GIF. It became the face of corporate incompetence in the age of social media. Meanwhile, the financial bleeding continued. By the close of trading on day 2, Orion Atlantic had lost an additional 12% of its stock value. 2 major institutional investors, Vanguard and BlackRock, had publicly disclosed reduced positions. 3 corporate travel agencies suspended Orion from their preferred carrier lists. And then the dominoes started falling in Blake's favor. Delta Airlines, which had been struggling with logistics delays on its East Coast routes, reached out to Horizon Global for an exploratory contract meeting. United followed the next day. American Airlines called on day 3. Blake didn't have to make a single pitch. The video did the selling. Every airline in the country wanted to be the one that partnered with the man Karen Whitmore had slapped, because partnering with Blake Bennett was now the fastest way to prove your airline wasn't Orion Atlantic. Gerald Thorne went on CNN's Anderson Cooper 360 on the second evening. He sat in a Navy suit and recounted the entire flight, from the double boarding pass check to the champagne refusal to the slap. His testimony was measured, specific, and devastating. I was sitting right next to him, seat 3B. I watched a woman treat a man like a criminal for the sole crime of being black in first class. And I watched a cabin full of people, myself included, sit there and let it happen. That's the part that keeps me up at night, not what she did, what we didn't do. The interview was viewed 14 million times. Gerald Thorne became an unlikely voice in the conversation about bystander responsibility and racial bias in American air travel. The FAA announced a formal investigation into Orion Atlantic's crew conduct policies. The Department of Transportation requested 5 years of complaint records. 2 former Orion flight attendants came forward with their own stories. One described being pressured by senior crew to seat suspicious-looking passengers away from first class. The other recounted watching a black family with premium tickets get redirected to economy on a half-empty flight, while Karen Whitmore told the gate agent, "Use your judgment." Orion Atlantic was no longer managing a PR crisis. It was facing an institutional reckoning. And at the center of it all, Blake Bennett still hadn't said a single public word. His silence was louder than anything Richard Caldwell had managed to say. On the 4th day, Blake Bennett spoke, not on television, not through a PR firm. He posted a 3-minute video on his personal Instagram, an account that had, until that week, fewer than 2,000 followers. It now had 4.7 million. He sat in a plain room, white wall behind him, no logo, no suit. Charcoal polo, the same kind he wore on the plane. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a yellowish shadow, still visible. He didn't try to hide it. 4 days ago, I was slapped across the face on a commercial flight because a flight attendant decided that a black man in old sneakers didn't belong in first class. She didn't ask what I did for a living. She didn't care. She looked at my skin and made her decision. What happened to Orion Atlantic's stock? That was business. I don't invest in companies that treat people the way they treated me. That's not anger. That's math. But I'm here to announce something that matters more than stock prices. The Open Skies Foundation. $5 million. Free legal representation for anyone discriminated against, harassed, or assaulted while traveling. On a plane, in an airport, at a hotel, anywhere. If you were treated as less than human because of your skin, your language, or your clothes, and you couldn't afford a lawyer, we'll find you one, and we'll pay for it. The video was viewed 61 million times in 24 hours. The foundation received 12,000 inquiries in its first week. Blake didn't do follow-up interviews. The video was his statement. He let it stand. But the ripples had already spread far beyond what any foundation could contain. Allison Reed, the young white flight attendant who had hesitated in the galley before finally picking up the intercom, resigned from Orion Atlantic 3 days after the video. She sent a private email to Blake through Horizon Global's general contact page. It read, "I should have stopped her before she touched you. I didn't, and I have to live with that. But I don't want to live with it quietly. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, I'm here. Blake read it twice. Then he called her personally. 2 weeks later, Allison Reed was hired as lead consultant for Horizon Global's new Passenger Dignity Initiative, a training program designed to be licensed to airlines, hotels, and transportation companies worldwide. The program's first module was titled, What You See versus Who They Are. Within 6 months, 4 airlines and 2 major hotel chains had signed on. Allison traveled to training centers across the country, standing in front of rooms full of crew members, telling the story of what she saw on Flight 174, and what she almost didn't do about it. Denise Carter, the black woman who had live-streamed the incident from row 5, was invited onto The Breakfast Club, The Daily Show, and 4 major podcasts within 10 days. Her following went from 200,000 to 3.1 million. She used the platform to launch a nonprofit called Witness, dedicated to training bystanders on how to safely document and intervene in racial discrimination in public spaces. Gerald Thorne quietly donated $500,000 to the Open Skies Foundation. He didn't announce it. Blake found out through the foundation's finance team and sent a handwritten note, 2 sentences on a plain white card. You stood up when no one else would. That cost you nothing and meant everything. Gerald kept the card in his desk drawer. He would look at it on days when the memory of that silent cabin came back, uninvited. Orion Atlantic survived, but barely. Richard Caldwell was replaced as CEO within 6 months. The board brought in Teresa Holt, a black woman, former Delta executive, known for operational excellence and zero tolerance for institutional bias. Her first act? Flying coach on 12 Orion flights in her first month, unannounced, sitting in different cabins, watching how crew treated passengers of different races, ages, and appearances. She took notes in a small black notebook, just like Blake's. She fired 3 more employees in her first 90 days, not for slapping anyone, for the smaller, quieter things, the eye rolls, the unnecessary bag checks, the random seat reassignments that always seemed to target the same kind of passenger. The things Karen Whitmore had been doing for 14 years before anyone with power bothered to notice. The things that don't go viral, but leave the same bruise. Blake Bennett went back to his life. He ran Horizon Global. He donated quietly. He flew commercial. Business class, same polo, same sneakers, same leather bag. The only difference was that now, occasionally, a flight attendant would recognize him. They would bring him water without being asked. They would smile. And sometimes they would lean in and whisper, "Thank you for what you did." Blake would nod. Never said, "You're welcome." Just a nod. Because he knew the truth that most people still hadn't learned. What happened on Flight 174 shouldn't have required a billionaire to fix. It shouldn't have taken $40 million to prove that a black man deserved to sit in the seat he paid for. But it did. And that said more about the world than it ever said about Blake Bennett. Now I want to ask you something. What would you have done in that cabin? If you were in seat 2A, or 4C, or row 6, would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked away? Be honest. Drop it in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, send it to them. Because right now, somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their own seat 3A, being told they don't belong. They need to know the world is watching. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.
$40 million was slapped, but Blake Bennett didn't do this for the money. He did it because dignity is not something you negotiate. Karen Whitmore spent 14 years doing the quiet version of that slap, the eye roll, the back chase, the random seat reassignments. Nobody feel though, nobody trained though. It took a rule on a billionaire fame for the world to care about something that happened every day to people who can fight back. That's the real story here. Not that Blake had the power to make them pay, but that it required power in the first place. A man's right to sit in his own seat should never depend on how many zeros are in his bank account. But here what stay with me, that cabin was full of people, good people, properly, who what and said nothing. And I keep wondering, the silence had a pride too. Is standing up for a stranger could you nothing but a moment of discomfort, and staying silent cost someone else the dignity. With that, a heavier to carry. Tell me in the comment. I read everyone. Share this if someone needs to hear it. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.